Hello there, and welcome to 50 Reasons Why I Thought I Was Autistic, which ultimately led to me getting a diagnosis earlier this year at the age of 49. And this is actually a compilation video of a series that I've made this year, but I thought it might be more useful to pop it into one video for those who prefer to watch one video. But also, I think it's more useful in terms of sharing and stuff. So that's been the reason why I've done this. And just to give you a bit of background as to why I did this series, and essentially it's really to demonstrate all of the thoughts, processes and self-reflection that we need to go through in order to become a self-realised autistic person or to go for a formal diagnosis. And please bear in mind that these are just my reasons why I thought I was autistic, and they could vary quite vastly actually from another autistic person. And essentially, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, and it's really important to remember that. But yeah, let's get started with reason number one. So number one is probably one of the most common reasons why people might think that they're autistic, and it's basically social issues. I've always struggled socially, and I kind of went for years through childhood really struggling to understand other children. I'd often prefer the company of adults because for me they just made kind of a lot more sense. I just found children too childish, if that makes any sense at all. I struggled again socially throughout all of my teenage years and adult years, and I just really remember, certainly in my teenage years, wondering why everybody else got the scripts and I just didn't. I just really struggled in terms of trying to connect with other people. Certainly in terms of interests, because my interests were kind of generally outside of the mainstream, and I think that's how a lot of people connect, isn't it, out in the world. And if you don't share a lot of interests with other people, it's really difficult to find things in common, isn't it, and to kind of talk about. So I would find that I would have to kind of sort of dampen down my interests and basically pretend to like a lot of stuff that I just really wasn't into. I remember at high school, some girls were really into Wet Wet Wet, the pop group, and it just wasn't my cup of tea at all, but I had to pretend I really liked them. I got the album. I even went to a concert. I think it was my first concert when I was 14, and it's just really difficult pretending that you're into something when you've got no interest in it at all, really. And as I entered adulthood, I had numerous difficulties again, and I found at that stage I was using alcohol really to be able to connect with people. So if I wanted to socialise with people, it would have to be in pubs or nightclubs, and yeah, there's a lot of sensory issues going on, in those kinds of environments. So the alcohol was used not only to be able to talk to other people, but it helped to kind of numb, all the noise and lights and all the extraneous stuff that was going on around me, because autistic people will often suffer with sensory issues, and I've certainly had no end of issues with sensory stuff. So alcohol was really useful to be able to move all of that stuff out into the periphery, really. Number two is the telephone, and what a great invention it is. I have to give it props for that. It's helped us all connect. It's helped us build society in many ways, but for autistic people, the phone can be an absolute nightmare. For me, I've really struggled with the phone in terms of friendships, because I don't mind too much, depending on the context. If I have to ring somebody that I don't know, in terms of maybe booking an appointment or something like that. And I think it's because there's a transaction to go through. It's very instruction based. So as long as I've got a clear idea of what I want to get out of that call, I'm generally fine with it, other than if I'm making a customer complaint in any way. I can basically go into a meltdown really easily, and it's taken me years to be able to try and deal with that really, but I know that that can be a real issue for me, and I try and avoid it where possible. But where I really struggle with the phone is when I speak to somebody that I know pretty well in a personal capacity. I just don't know how to do it. I really, really struggle with not being able to see them for some reason. I don't know whether it's because I need to be able to kind of see body language, or I don't know. I've just always found it really difficult, and it's certainly led to the breakdown of friendships because of it. And I often get really stressed out whenever I give my phone number to somebody that I know, because I'm fine with texting, I'm fine with emails generally, although maybe I do have issues with email communication sometimes as well. But I think this aversion has certainly got worse in recent years because I've been way more home-based because of chronic illness. And I think part of it is I worry that whenever I'm speaking to somebody that I know, how do you tell them that you're doing the same thing over and over? You know, how does one phone call become different to the other? And I get really stressed out about it, and I just don't want to do it. You know, it's really difficult to think almost creatively what I'm going to say to people, and I just find it really stressful. I find there's so much pressure involved that I just avoid all phone calls really. And I'm just thinking of one person in particular who is a friend I've had for years, and I really love her, and I know that she was trying to pin me down to a phone call a couple of years ago now, and I kept stressing about it and stressing and stressing, and I sent her text messages to say, oh, can't make that call today, can we do another time? And again, she'd try and pin me down to a time, and for whatever reason I found it just really difficult to be honest with her, to say, I find phone calls really difficult, and do you mind if maybe we do email communication instead? I don't know, I just found it really difficult to communicate that to her, and we've kind of lost contacts as a result of that. And yeah, I just kind of feel bad about it really. Maybe as time goes on, I'll connect with people again and just explain perhaps about my autism diagnosis, and that may well give them more context as to why I've been like I've been really. Who knows, I guess we'll see as time goes on. But I just want to say that this is just my experience with the phone, and I know that other autistic people have an aversion to talking to people that they don't know on the phone. So it just evidences how we're all different really, doesn't it? Reason number 3 is light sensitivity. And this can be a massive issue for autistic people, and certainly for me. I've always struggled with light sensitivity, and I wear sunglasses pretty much every day of the year. I just find everything kind of too bright. Even on a winter's day, I, have to wear sunglasses because I just really struggle to focus, because it's just too difficult. And certainly on really bright days, if I'm not wearing any sunglasses, I find it just really painful, and I find it just really difficult to see. At home, I've got loads of fairy lights everywhere. As you'll see here in my studio, I've got kind of loads of them really, and they're on the other side of the studio as well. And in our sitting room, we'll always use lamps because I find the overhead lights just really too much. And I've always been really sensitive to strobe lighting as well. So if something comes on the TV, I'll immediately have to find the remote control to turn it over because I just can't cope with it. The flashing lights are just painful, really. Reason number 4, and again, this is a massive issue for a lot of autistic people, and it's sound sensitivity. I've got such an issue with this, and I can hear the tiniest of noises that other people just aren't able to kind of hear. I can even hear my eyes blink, which kind of freaks me out whenever I think about it too much. Thankfully, I can block it out a lot of the time, but it's certainly something that really kind of almost sets my teeth on edge whenever I kind of think about it. But sound in general is a real issue for me, and I find it really difficult to concentrate on anything if there's loads of sound going on as well. Like for instance, my studio is on a quite a busy road, and I'm finding it really difficult at times to concentrate on you and what I'm saying because there's loads of tractors going up and down the road today, so hence lots of jump cuts, no doubt. But also in life in general, it's caused me no ends of issues. I remember a few years ago, I worked somewhere that used to go out to local cafes and stuff for meetings because they needed a larger space than they had in the office. And they really, really liked I'm trying to remember what it was called. I think it might have been a Cafe Nero. It probably wasn't, but anyway, the whole acoustics of the place were just really difficult for me because all I could concentrate on was hearing all the crockery and bashing around of all the cups going on in the kitchen area, and I couldn't hear what my colleagues were saying, which was really difficult because I'd often have to take minutes for the meeting, and I can tell you it's really hard to concentrate on what people are saying and to take notes of what they're saying when your brain is kind of having a battle really with this kind of extraneous noise that is coming in at a louder volume than, you know, the voices that are in front of you really. It's really horrible, and now that I know I'm autistic, I can explain a lot of this, but at the time I used to think I was really weird, and I went for hearing tests because I thought there was something wrong with my ears and my hearing, but they'd always come back and say your hearing is actually exceptional, so there's no issues with it. So it was really difficult for me at the time to realise it was actually an information processing issue and not a hearing issue, because that's kind of how it felt at the time. So I'm just really thankful that I have the language now to explain why I've had so many issues with that. And also it affects my home life. If something is dropped in the kitchen and we've got tiles on the floor, that causes just excruciating pain for me. And again, I just thought I was being a drama queen about it, but finally I know now why I've had such issues with sound sensitivity. Reason number 5 is difficulties with hierarchical structures. I just find it really difficult to think why we as a society have decided that it's okay to consider some people better, more important, more powerful than others. So if we think about bosses or CEOs or the aristocracy, I just find it incomprehensible why we've done this. Whenever I look at another human being, I think it's another human being, and I just really don't get why we're supposed to almost be fearful of other people in this regard. You know, it's just really difficult for me to understand, and even with my newfound autistic understanding of myself, I still don't understand it. Reason number 6 is I'm a real fan of rules and regulations, which is probably kind of weird when you consider that I'm completely not respectful of hierarchical structures, but you know, that's kind of what law is, isn't it? Law and order. It tells us that we have to follow these rules and regulations, but I think I like them because it really means clear understanding for everybody, and through these rules we can have respect for other people, ideally. I just really struggle when rules aren't followed, and for instance, I drove myself and a colleague to a meeting years ago, and we had to park up somewhere, and she went to get the parking tickets, and I said, oh, just pop it in the front of the car, and I was just getting my bags together, and she did put it in the front of the car, but when she closed the door, the ticket just went flying and it kind of landed in the footwell, I think. And as a result of that, I got a parking ticket, and I can't tell you the stress it caused me. I really wanted to have a meltdown in the moment over it when we got back to the car, because I was just absolutely beside myself internally that this had happened. And my colleague was really sorry about it, and she explained to me if I contacted the council and showed them my proof of purchase that it would, be completely fine. And it was in the end, but I really really struggled with that, and I couldn't get the whole thing out of my head for days. And yeah, it just took me a long time to calm down from that. And another example, and it's to do with cars again, but where we live, there's some designated parking for residents. And a few years ago now, we had a neighbour that I didn't really get on with him, if I'm honest, but he and his wife would park in weird and wonderful areas that weren't actually designated parking, and essentially they would cause obstacles for neighbours trying to get their cars out, and I just couldn't cope with it at all. I would be thinking about it all the time whenever I'd see a car that wasn't kind of in its right area, and just caused me so much angst. And I never wanted to speak directly to him or his wife about it, because I knew I'd have a complete meltdown, and the embarrassment of that would have been too much to cope with. So yeah, it just caused me loads of angst, and I was super pleased when they moved out, I have to say. Reason number 7 is stims, and stimming behaviour is really, really common in autistic people and people with ADHD as well. So it's a need for basically constant movements to help you kind of regulate yourself and your emotions, and it's just comforting. And I kind of stim all the time, and as a late diagnosed person, I've learned how to hide my stims, because they obviously look a bit weird to some people. And I do a lot of kind of making bubbles in my mouth and making kind of tiny clicking noises with my tongue. And when I'm not doing that, I'm often kind of playing with my hands or my nails. I was a nail biter for years actually, and it's only been over the last year or so that I've stopped biting my nails. So instead I'll kind of play with my nails, and I'm often kind of twirling my hair. Gosh, there's all sorts of stuff, it's just something that's kind of constant, I think, and it's a big thing with autistic people, I've learned. Reason number 8 is eye contact, and this is a real issue for lots of autistic people, and I've certainly had issues with eye contact for all of my life, I'd say. As a high masking person, or certainly somebody that's been high masking through my life, I've been able to develop strategies around eye contact. So I've learned to kind of look at people and then kind of look away quite a lot. And I've noticed that whenever I look at a person for any prolonged period of time, my eyes get really confused as to where I'm looking, because I want to look at one eye and then the other eye and then back to the original eye, and I'm constantly oscillating between their eyes, and while I'm doing that I just cannot concentrate on what they're saying or whatever I'm supposed to be saying. So it's caused me a lot of issues over the years. Reason number 9 is difficulties with employment, and this has been huge for me, and I've been so grateful to have my autistic or my autism diagnosis to explain why I've had so many issues around employment. And I think I've had around 40 plus jobs in my life, which is just a ridiculous amount, isn't it? And I've just struggled so much, whether it be with my boss. I've always had this thing where I think I'm always in trouble with my boss, regardless of who it is and how well I got on with them. I just found that whenever they'd want a meeting with me or a one-to-one meeting, I would just develop this whole dread for whatever period of time it was before the meeting came around, and I'd get really stressed out about it. I'd also struggle with colleagues, and the thought of trying to have friendships with some colleagues as well was really difficult. And on top of that, I'd often struggle with the work itself. And I think this is something that I'm going to do a video about separately because there's so much to discuss really. So certainly that's one for the future, I think. And reason number 10, and well done actually if you've got this far in the video, is routines. This has been a big one for me, and I've always really liked routines in my life, but I would say that it's got way more consuming as I've got older, and I've learned that it can be a real issue for women in their perimenopausal years, which I am. And certainly in the last few years, it's become, yeah, a lot worse. I found that I was really seeking out routine, and I just find comfort in doing the same kind of thing every day. And I find that whenever I'm not able to stick to a routine for whatever reason, maybe I've got an appointment where I have to go out, it really kind of throws me out for the rest of the day. So yeah, I just find comfort and stability in routines, and it can be really all consuming. So reason number 11 is awkward body language, and I'm sure a lot of autistic people can relate to this one. I've just always felt awkward in myself, and particularly in my childhood and teenage years, maybe my 20s as well. It's all been to varying degrees, really. You know, I still feel quite awkward at times, but certainly I had a real issue with this in my younger years. For whatever reason, I am conjuring up some images in my mind of networking events in particular in my job life, and you know, you'd always have these ridiculous kind of comfort breaks or whatever where you'd have to go off and network with other people, and I've just never been able to do it, and I just kind of stand around awkwardly in the sidelines. Perhaps I'd go and try and make myself a cup of tea or coffee, but I don't know, I felt like my body language was really giving away the fact that I was autistic. And also, T-Rex arms are a real thing I've learned about autistic people. And I remember I went to a birthday party in my early 20s, I think, and one of my friends had filmed some of the party, so we were looking back at some footage, and she noticed that I was kind of doing T-Rex arms for basically the whole party, and I've just never liked parties for one. And she said to me, "What on earth are you doing with your arms?" And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing with my arms, so I don't know how to explain this at all. And as well as autistic people, I've learned that some ADHD people find comfort in this arm position as well. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Number 12 is punctuality. And I've just always had this thing ingrained in me that not only do I have to turn up on time, I have to turn up early. And this has been kind of all consuming really. And I only really noticed that I had a real thing about this when I met my partner Ian, because he's late for everything. So there was you know, a bit of almost conflict there at times, that I'd feel this incessant need to turn up kind of early to things. So yeah, it's been evident throughout all of my life actually. I'd always turn up early to work. If I was commuting, I'd always have to catch, you know, the earlier train or earlier bus than perhaps the average person would, because I'd be thinking of all the what ifs. What if it doesn't turn up? You know, what if there's something that happens along the way and I arrive late? So I just have never been able to cope with that thought of arriving late somewhere. And yeah, I would say this is quite a significant autistic trait of mine. Number 13 is sensory issues in terms of touch. So I've talked about previously on my channel my light sensitivity and noise sensitivity, but I have a real kind of issue with touch as well. I really don't like being touched. Other than my partner, obviously, I find it really, yeah, difficult at times, and it's certainly been an issue actually in the workplace. For instance, I was working somewhere, it was a temporary position, and it was quite a big office, and one of the people that worked there, he was a chap, came over while we were having a little bit of a meeting within the workspace, and without asking, he started to vigorously massage my shoulders, and I just went nuts about it. I thoroughly embarrassed him, I think, in front of the whole room, because I was just like, what do you think you're doing? Can you just stop that? And I noticed actually a few people's kind of heads went down because they were quite embarrassed, but I just thought, I don't care. I don't want you touching me. I don't think it's what anybody should be doing, certainly in the workplace. You know, it was just such a shock, and that was my immediate response. He apologised in the moment, but there was another instance a few weeks later where he came in and he touched me on the shoulder. And there was nobody else in the room this time, but I just thought, I can't cope with this at all. And when he left the room, I burst into tears, and another senior member of staff came in shortly after that, and I said, you know what, you can stuff your job because I'm not putting up with this. So I just left, because I find that kind of behaviour unacceptable. And it has happened in previous jobs as well. I have to say it is mainly men that have done it, but yeah, I had to put in a complaint about a member of staff elsewhere about this behaviour as well. And you know, I just can't stand it. And I think a lot of autistic people are the same. I just don't understand why somebody would touch somebody else without their consent. It's just, yeah, I don't understand. Also, I hate handshakes, and I have always done whatever I can to be able to get out of them. And the amount of times I've said to people, you know what, I've got a cold, so I won't shake your hand today, or, you know, something along those lines, because I just really try and avoid them where possible. And also, I struggle with sensory issues in terms of clothes. So yeah, there's various things that I've just never been able to wear really, such as flip-flops. I think they might be called thongs in the US, but they're basically kind of sandals that kind of come between your big toe and the next toe. I've just, oh gosh, never been able to get on with those, and even the thought kind of makes me cringe. That just, yeah, can't wear those at all. Also, I have a real thing with my neck, and I can't wear anything that's really tight around my neck. I can't stand being touched on my neck. It has got better as I've gotten older, because I used to really freak out about this when I was younger, but yeah, I've got issues around that. Weirdly, however, I can wear scarves, and I think it's because I know that I can remove them really easily, but the thought of wearing a polo neck, not for me. And also, I've yeah, not been able to wear high heels for years. I think the last time I wore them was my mid-20s, and it suddenly dawned on me that I really hated wearing them. So I, yeah, just have never worn them ever since. I also have real issues with itchy clothing and clothing tags, and I've never been able to wear wool at all. Number 15 is special interests, and I think this is probably one that a lot of autistic people can relate to. I've just found that I've had interests in my life that have been kind of all consuming really, and certainly longer term ones have been arts and illustration, hence why I'm an artist. And music is another one. I'm passionate about a lot of bands and singer-songwriters, in particular REM and Neutral Milk Hotel. I think REM is my longest term special interest though. I've always loved that band, as well as the Beatles actually, and yeah, that gives you a flavour actually. I could talk about bands and music that I love for ages, but we'll perhaps save that for another video. And also YouTube is absolutely a special interest of mine. I really enjoy making content. I had another channel, it's still going actually, called Clay Disarray for my artwork, and that one's been going for about 9 years. So once I was diagnosed as autistic, you know, it just made sense really for me to create content about this whole new kind of massive event in my life, you know, and yeah, I'm really enjoying it, I have to say. Number 16 is alexithymia. And alexithymia is basically a information processing difference. So a lot of autistic people don't actually recognise their emotions in the here and now. They may take some time to be able to, well, basically recognise what these emotions are and what they mean. So for instance, with any form of trauma, it's really common for autistic people to have a delayed sense of processing, and you know that certainly relates to me. And I think this is one that I'll probably discuss in an individual video really, because there's just so much to talk about with this one. But yeah, certainly this has been a big one for me. Number 17 is a real dislike of being overstimulated. So when we're talking about overstimulation, we can be talking about any number of things, can't we? And certainly a lot of things would relate to me. So I think for today, I'm just going to give you the examples of speed and travel. And yeah, anything that involves the two of those is a nightmare for me. And for instance, I absolutely despise roller coasters, and I just cannot get into my head why people would really enjoy them. I've been on maybe 3 roller coasters in my life, and I came away from them feeling just completely traumatized. I absolutely hated every moment of them, and I have similar responses in fast cars and fast public transport, buses and trains. You know, it really does distress me, and I'll do whatever I can to mitigate, you know, all these stresses that are going on. So I find music really helpful, but still it's something that I can do a million times over, I think, and I still just would not be able to get used to it. Number 18 is meltdowns, and meltdowns can look really different in each autistic person because, you know, we're all different. It may look like somebody's losing their temper, it may look like somebody's really upset about something, but meltdowns are basically when an autistic person is externally showing their distress or their discomforts. And while we're talking about travel, I remember a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago now, I was travelling with a boss just over to Dublin on a flight, and needless to say, I hate flying, and for whatever reason, I was really freaking out about it that day. I just didn't want to fly, but obviously I had to, so we got onto the flights, and as soon as we took off, I immediately started freaking out, and I now know it was a meltdown. And I just kept saying stuff like, you know what, I think we're all going to die on this flight, and the plane's going to crash. And my boss, thankfully, was really sympathetic. She knew that I had a fear of flying, but I didn't notice at the time because I was freaking out too much. But she said everybody's faces around us was like just full of horror. They were all worried that the plane was going to crash. But yeah, that's just one example of one of my meltdowns, and I think certainly this is another theme that's deserving of its own video at some point. So yeah, that's just one example for today. Number 19 is having difficulties dealing with criticism. And if you know anything about being an artist, it involves dealing with criticism all the time. If you're publishing work on social media or other websites, of course it's going to attract conversations, both negative and positive, and invariably it's the negative comments that I'll always remember. And I think this is really common for autistic people. And even soft critique can cause me anxiety. Like, for instance, Ian, my partner, is brilliant for sharing ideas and helping me really work through ideas, etc. He doesn't work in the creative field, but he's certainly an artist in his soul. But whenever he's tried to give me advice on work that I've already done or ideas that I've had that don't align with what I've got going on in my head at that moment, I found it really quite difficult. And we've learned how to deal with this over the years. And the amount of times he said to me, Lizzie, I think this would be a really good idea. And I've said, nah, I don't think that would work at all, in a kinder way than that, hopefully. But generally speaking, I'll always come round to his ideas. It might take me weeks or months to kind of come round to that idea. But yeah, we get there in the end. But I've learned how to deal with his critique and his criticism, and that has been really helpful actually in dealing with commissioners who I've had to work with in order to create artwork for them. So yeah, it's another interesting one. And reason number 20 is tiredness. And since my diagnosis, this is making so much sense. I've just always been a really tired person compared to my peers or my contemporaries. I've just never really understood why until now. Like, for instance, to give you an example, I had a friend years ago now, I'm talking way back into my 20s, and she absolutely loved shopping. And I've always been a bit indifferent to it. Every now and again, I would build myself up into thinking today has to be a shopping day because I need to go out and get clothes or, whatever. And she loved shopping for clothes. And we'd have a day out shopping every now and again together. And her stamina for the whole session was, for me, unparalleled. I just couldn't believe where on earth she got her energy from. And this was at a time where I walked everywhere. I certainly wasn't unfit. And she generally drove everywhere. So it just got me thinking, why is it that I'm a relatively fit person, but I am absolutely pooped by lunchtime? And this girl can go shopping till tonight if she wants to. I would just feel physically exhausted, and certainly by the mid-afternoon, every bone in my body would be aching. And after a shopping day like this, it would take me, a full day to get over it, and I just couldn't understand why. But obviously now that I know I'm autistic, this was sensory overload. There was so much going on. It's not actually just the shopping itself, it's the environments, having to negotiate with other people. There's lights, noises, and all sorts of stuff. And that's a hell of a lot of information for an autistic brain to kind of take on board, really. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense now, I have to say. Reason 21 is going on holiday. Where do I start? This has been something I've just always had an issue with. The thoughts of going on holiday usually evokes a feeling of excitement in people, doesn't it? And, you know, I have had feelings of excitement around going on holiday, but um, the actual being on holiday itself is something that I've always struggled with, and it's kind of got worse as I've gotten older. So, for instance, before I became kind of chronically ill, Ian and I would occasionally go abroad for, you know, the typical kind of sun, sand, and sea holidays. And I just really struggle, and I think it's a lot to do with having a lack of routine on holiday. And I'd often make Ian feel a bit kind of tetchy or a bit kind of uncomfortable because he really enjoys relaxing on holiday, and the thoughts of relaxing is really appealing to me, but actually trying to relax on a hot holiday has yeah, just always been difficult for me, and it's only now I'm realizing that I have sensory issues with heat, and being in a hot environment kind of makes me feel uncomfortable, if I'm being honest with myself. And also having a lack of structure in the day, I just always would get kind of frustrated as to what we're going to do, how we're going to fill our time. And yeah, if you've got that kind of personality really, and you're with somebody who just wants to relax, yeah, it can cause a bit of friction here and there, if I'm honest. And I found this has gotten worse as I've not been able to drink alcohol, because whenever we'd go away, we'd kind of focus a lot of our time around drinking, which would fill me with a bit of entertainment, really. I felt like I had something to do. We'd go to the bar, then maybe we'd go for a walk. But as time's gone on and I've not been able to drink alcohol, I think that, yeah, has made the whole kind of structure thing even more important for me, really. Reason 22 is transitions, and this is a big one for a lot of autistic people. And it's basically when you move from one situation to another, or from one setting to another. If you ever wonder why I have so many jump cuts, that's the reason. I have so much traffic on this road that it's difficult at times. So yeah, if you've wondered why, that's why. So most people have the mental agility to move from one situation to another almost seamlessly, but for lots of autistic people, it causes real problems. Like, for instance, I spent a lot of time in my life living alone, or living in bedsits, or living in kind of shared accommodation, and I was therefore responsible for getting my own food and medications, or whatever you need in life, really. And sometimes I absolutely couldn't face going out of the front door and just navigating the world at large, really. So it would mean that sometimes I went without food, or I'd eat completely inappropriate food at home that, you know, that was the only thing available to me. So I might eat crisps or sweets, or, you know, stuff like that that you shouldn't be relying on for nutrition. Also, if I needed medication sometimes, you know, if I was ill with a cold, or, you know, a flu style bug even, I would be completely reliant on myself to get medications, and sometimes I just wouldn't be able to do it. I just could not face the thought of going out, so I just wouldn't have medication, and that's really hard, isn't it? You know, sometimes you need paracetamol to bring down a fever, or lozenges to help with a sore throat, and I'd go without sometimes because I absolutely could not face going out in the world and having to deal with people. And I'm sure a lot of people, whether they're autistic or not, feel like this some of the time, but some autistic people feel like this a lot of the time. Another example is that every morning I'll need to have a walk around the block, after I've had a coffee, because I've got gallbladder issues, it really helps me to, process that through my body. And some mornings I absolutely cannot face going out into the world, so it will mean that I'll have gallbladder pain for the rest of the day. Some mornings I just don't want to say good morning to people as I pass them. I don't want to hear loads of traffic noise right in my ear as I'm walking on the pavements. It can be just utterly exhausting, and I've always wondered why I've had an issue with this. And of course, now that I know I'm autistic, this explains just so much for me. Reason 23 is mental health issues. I would find it basically impossible for a person to be diagnosed as autistic and not to have any mental health issues as a result of that. I think it comes hand in hand. I've struggled with depression and anxiety for much of my life. Much of my childhood was consumed with anxiety because I just didn't fit in. I struggled with just so much stuff, and I've still to do a video about my childhood and school years actually, but they've just both been a constant companion in my life. And like many autistic people, I suspect, I've really struggled with therapy because I just couldn't connect with any counsellors or therapists. I just felt like there was a gulf between us, and I'd often lie about how good I was feeling because I just thought I just don't see the point in talking about how I really feel because this person doesn't understand me. And medications have not worked. I've been on, I'd say maybe, I don't know, between 8 and 10 different antidepressants in my life, or medications that are combined antidepressants and anti-anxiety, and they just always made me feel horrendous. I just felt really kind of jittery on them, and I just really wanted to stretch all the time when I was on them, which was really weird. And I found that whenever I've tried to talk to GPs and healthcare professionals about how I was feeling, I just always felt that they just didn't understand. Like I didn't fully meet their criteria somehow. It's really difficult to explain, but yeah, it's been really difficult at times. I've really struggled with mental health, and again, I think this is a video in itself really, because there's a lot to discuss with this one. Reason 24 is another sensory issue that I have, and it's about touch, but it's in a different way to how I've described it previously. And it's basically things I touch that I cannot stand. And one is dough, actually. Well, it's like a fritter dough that I make with courgettes and gram flour, and I have to get Ian to make the dough for me because it gets really sticky, and I get to a point where I just want to cry because it just engulfs my hands so much that I just can't imagine ever getting it off my hands again. So I immediately have to go and wash my hands because I just can't bear it, and the thought of it alone is making me feel really stressed. And the second example I can give you is clean plates from the dishwasher, and they have just the most horrible, horrible texture going on. It's like they're really dry and almost grainy, and it really, really sets my teeth on edge. And I don't know if anybody else has this thing around plates out the dishwasher. Please let me know if you do, but I just cannot bear it. We don't have a dishwasher, and whenever we go away, we might use one in a cottage or whatever, and it's always a stark reminder to me as to why I don't want a dishwasher, and I'm happy washing up every day, because the thought of it is just horrendous. The next trait or reason why I thought I was autistic is people pleasing. And I think this is a big one for high masking autistic people, isn't it? And I'm sure lots of you can relate to this one. Basically, I've always gone out of my way to make other people comfortable, and certainly a lot more comfortable than myself. I think it all just boils down to a fear of not fitting in, doesn't it? And really trying to connect in any way that we can with another person or other people. And it's really not a good thing to do in terms of your own mental health. It's almost being really dismissive of your own feelings, thoughts, and being, really, isn't it? And a part of people pleasing is fawning. And this again is just such a ridiculous thing for us to have to do in order to try and have connections with other people. And it's essentially offering praise to another person, whether they deserve it or not. And I used to work with a counsellor a few years back, and I'm not a counsellor. I have absolutely zero training in therapy, and I worked with this lady in an administrative role. I did some communications as well, and she headed up some training because the organisation was partly a training provider. But she had such a brilliant presentation on fear responses. Usually people might come up with two, the whole kind of flight or fight response, or maybe they'll add freeze in there as well. But she had 7, and I've just written them down actually. It took me a while to remember, but they were fight, flight, freeze, which we know, fawn, and people will do that to get out of a really uncomfortable situation, and I've certainly done that. Both as a youngster and in the workplace, as it's, you know, the only response I could think of in that moment to deal with whatever stress I was going through. Flop is another one, and yeah, it's just when you feel kind of complete overwhelm in a situation. So that's an automatic kind of fear response, and I'm really thinking about autistic shutdowns here. I think, you know, that really kind of matches up quite well. And the next one is fart, and that's really about our internal workings, isn't it? And how many times have you had a really nervous stomach before you've had to go and do something? You know, I used to really struggle with stomach issues when I had to go out to work every day, so that's certainly one. And the last one she had was fuck, and it's really when we're kind of thinking about our most primal responses, isn't it? And we'll often see animals behave like that, and of course we're animals too. And misattribution of arousal theory is a phenomenon where a person's brain will confuse anxiety with arousal. I think the best known bit of research on this is the suspension bridge test, and it basically consisted of some men walking over a anxiety-inducing suspension bridge. They were then confronted with an attractive woman who was the experimenter, and it's thought that because their heart rates were dramatically increased through anxiety, they misattributed signs of anxiety for those of arousal. And this article on Game of Thrones about how they were all feeling before a big fight the following day is really interesting. And because I'm learning so much about autism these days, I'm actually going to include an 8th F here, and it's fidget. And of course, fidgets are stims, aren't they? So how many times have your stims become really exaggerated as a fear response? It's really common, isn't it? So yeah, those are the 8 fear response Fs. Reason 26 is an absolute hatred of injustice. And this is something that's been with me my whole life. I just really believe in fairness. And I think this is really common among autistic people, or so I'm learning. Like, for instance, we had protesters, I think earlier this year, from the Just Stop Oil campaign. So it's all about the climate crisis and awareness, and they've done some really clever campaigns, or certainly I feel. But because they were found on a Zoom call organising protests, they were banged up for 5 years. And when you consider other people that have done really abhorrent things to other people, or children or animals, and they're, you know, incarcerated for a lot less time. Or all too often they're freed on suspended sentences. And I could go on and on with giving you all sorts of examples about this, but I just want and expect people to be treated fairly. Reason 27 is being really uncomfortable with the thoughts of being perceived. Now, this may seem really incredible because I'm talking to you via YouTube, and it probably seems like I have no problem with people perceiving me or observing me or listening to me, but I do have real issues with this. I can talk to a camera with next to no issues because I don't have a pair of eyes or multiple pairs of eyes looking at me and almost anticipating or expecting what I'm going to say. And if you were all sat in a room in front of me, I can guarantee you there is absolutely no way I could speak to you in the way that I'm doing now, because I just, yeah, I'm just get so uncomfortable with being observed and being perceived. And this has manifested itself in so many ways. And like, for instance, I've talked about how I've lived in shared accommodation in my life, and I would never be able to go to the kitchen and cook because the thought of somebody coming in and seeing me cooking and maybe judging me on what I'm making or how I'm cooking or whatever really is so uncomfortable a thought. So I'd have to be really canny about food, and it's a really life-limiting way of living. And I've also had issues with being perceived in the workplace. So I've never been able to do public speaking because the thought of, as I say, everybody staring at me would be way too much to cope with. Whenever I've had to give kind of presentations, they've just been horrendous for me. They just cause so much anxiety, and I've done whatever I've been able to just avoid doing them unless I've absolutely had to do them. And because of this this fear of being perceived, I've always had this thing around recognition, and I don't know if this will resonate with anybody at all, whether it's even an autistic thing or not. But if I'm walking around somewhere that I used to live and I see someone who I haven't seen for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years, I have it in my head that they won't recognise me. And I don't know what that's all about, if I'm honest, because if I'm sitting here now really trying to think this through logically, if I'm able to recognise somebody, chances are they're going to be able to recognise me too. And I don't know whether this is related to autism or whether, I don't know, it's just unique to me, but I would love to know if you also have this thing where you don't think you're going to be recognised by people that you've known in your life. And this whole kind of theme is really why I always look the same in my YouTube videos, because I want to minimise the risk really of being recognised outside of my YouTube channel. You know, if I'm just out and about, I would find it really uncomfortable, if I'm honest. And I have done a full video on why I always look the same on YouTube, and I'll link that below if you want to check that one out afterwards. Reason 28 is the compulsion to dissect every social interaction I've ever had. For instance, if I've been out socialising and I've had various conversations with different people, or even one conversation with one person, as soon as I get home, my brain will be constantly churning over that conversation, trying to find situations where I've potentially embarrassed myself. I often will have a bit of a debrief with Ian after I've seen anybody, just to really go through what I've said and how I think I came across, really to try and put my mind at ease really. And I would love to know if you experience this as well. Reason 29 is having illnesses and conditions that are comorbid with autism. And I spoke briefly about this in a video about imposter syndrome recently, but I wanted to include it here because it's very much one of the reasons why I thought I could be autistic. And I've spoken a few times now, but I have mast cell activation syndrome. It's basically a hyperactive immune system, so I have to be really careful around my food and environments. And I also have POTS, which is really common in autistic people. I'm also mildly dyslexic, which I only realised in my early 30s. So I've always had difficulties with looking at like dense text. So it's like my eyes are really trying to find patterns between the text. So it becomes like a visual thing rather than looking at a load of words, really. And of course, mental health conditions come pretty much hand in hand with autism, don't they? Whether it be depression or anxiety or CPTSD. I really struggle with that acronym for some reason, but there's a whole host of different mental health conditions that are comorbid with autism. So it was something that I thought, you know, this is making so much sense as a whole. You know, I've got these conditions that are comorbid with autism, so this is really furthering my case to put forward to an assessor, really. And of course, there's a host of other comorbid conditions out there. So if you are in a situation where you're trying to work out if you could be autistic or whether you're going for an assessment, if you do have any health conditions, I would be investigating whether there's any link with autism, because it's a good way to add further evidence in support of your case, really. And of course, ADHD is really common among autistic people as well, so it's just worth doing a little bit of research on that. Reason number 30 is I absolutely hate Christmas. I don't actually remember too many Christmases from when I was young, if I'm honest. I had quite a complicated childhood in that there was lots of alcohol going on, DV, mental health issues, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate. And as I got older and I left home, I'd invariably spend Christmas with friends, and although I always appreciated their efforts in inviting me along for the day, I just always felt like like an outsider. But it wasn't only that, I just felt uncomfortable with the whole thing, really, the whole kit and caboodle. Just found having to deal with a lot of people on, one specific day really a lot to cope with, and that's before you've even factored in having to share gifts with people. And I've always had a thing where I hate opening gifts in front of other people. I absolutely hate it, and of course it's such a big part of the day, isn't it? So I'd have to put on my best autistic mask for the day, and it would be just so emotionally and physically draining for me. I've just never ever felt comfortable with Christmas. And I think occasions like Christmas can be really difficult for lots of autistic people, and certainly not all autistic people, because we know a lot of autistic people love Christmas because of what it all kind of represents for them, and it might make them feel cozy and safe among family members and people that really understand them. But for me, I've just always thought, oh my God, it's Christmas soon, isn't it? And I just really wish that I could hide away for the whole of December, because I find it really tough. And I think the whole kind of Christmas Day thing, it's such a unique day, isn't it? Because certainly here in the UK, everything stops for Christmas, everything closes down, and we're all almost forced into this celebration, whether we like it or not. The whole kind of TV schedules are all different, and it's difficult if you're so used to a routine and you like structure. It's a difficult day to get through, and I'd love to know if you too struggle with Christmas or whether you like it. Reason 31 is unusual ways of speaking or formal speech, and this is something that's been really evident throughout my whole history. I've mentioned before that I was brought up in a Scottish family, so I did have a Scots accent when I was young, but through masking I soon had an English accent at school, and the English accent just kind of overtook the Scottish accent until, you know, I just speak with an English accent now. But my speech has always been quite formal in its structure, and I don't have many kind of clues as to having a kind of regional accent, so I sounded almost posher than my peers or contemporaries, and I'm certainly not from a posh family, but it's just something that, you know, my brain's just done really. And I've often struggled with more casual language or kind of colloquial language, and I've just had a very kind of formal way of speaking. It has relaxed over maybe the last kind of decade or two, so I'll use kind of more slang words, etc. But I really struggled with that when I was young, and it was something that was often picked up by my peers, that I sounded sort of quite geeky really. So it certainly felt like a clue when I was going through my kind of self-evaluation really, because it's actually really common in autistic people to develop a formal way of speaking, or to have an accent that's somehow out of kilter within the kind of locality really. Reason 32 is a common one for autistic people, and it's shutdowns, and I've certainly had lots of experiences in terms of shutting down. And the one example that's coming to mind is that I know a lot of people will talk about the Sunday scaries because they've got work the next day, and you know, they're starting to feel a bit kind of like, oh, I don't want to go to work tomorrow. How is the weekend nearly over? And gosh, I've had the Sunday scaries with bells on, because I've often struggled in jobs, which I've talked about in a previous video. I would often have my version of the Sunday scaries, but it would get to a point where Ian would be really worried because I was almost non-responsive, or actually non-responsive some of the time, and he'd often think that he'd done something wrong, or you know, he'd offended me somehow, because I just would become almost catatonic in that I would be staring off into space and just not able to hear him really. It's like my brain would just shut down, and it was pure anxiety, and it was the only way that I kind of knew how to cope really. I'd be so worried about the following day, and I would either be thinking of kind of worst case scenarios for the following day, or I'd be thinking of nothing at all. It was really stressful, and I feel really bad for Ian that this was a common scenario on a Sunday. And yeah, it was something that I certainly added to the list while I was going through my kind of self-evaluation, because it just felt very unusual behaviour really. Reason 33 is, gosh, how would I describe it? It's like a combination of perfectionism, a fear of failure, and having to be right all of the time. And this is a really stressful combination, and it's presented itself in many ways in my life. And I think it probably ties in with masking in many ways. I've been a high masking autistic person throughout my life, and we want to present a highly curated version of ourselves to the outside world, and there's many reasons for that. We want to fit in, we want to avoid any opportunity to be bullied or to be picked on, and I think that in itself really encourages perfectionism, which is really destructive, isn't it? And because of this fear of failure, I've kind of quietened down so many aspects of myself really. And thinking about social media, actually, I've always been astonished and in complete awe of people that have been able to kind of, I don't know, tweet out their thoughts without having to put actually much thought into kind of what they're typing, because I would agonise for ages over just sending a tweet out into the world about my artwork or something like that. And I've just always had to go through various kind of stumbling blocks almost within my mind before I would allow myself to even say anything to the world. So it feels really weird and interesting talking to you here on YouTube, because I'm always scared of getting things wrong. And I have to put so much time and effort into editing my videos because I just overanalyze everything I say, and it's really exhausting. And I see other people doing live streams, and I'm just in awe of how they're able just to allow themselves to say words in the here and now. I'd love to be able to do that. And hopefully, the longer I'm able to talk about my experience of being autistic, perhaps this will become a bit easier, or I'll be a bit easier on myself, because it's really self-limiting, this way of thinking. Maybe it's something that I'll build up to at some point, you never know. I think it's all about confidence, really, isn't it? And I've always struggled in that area. So yeah, fear of failure is a biggie for me. Reason number 34 is a love of organisation. And this is a really stereotypical autistic trait, isn't it? But I wanted to include it because I did have a discussion about this with my autism assessor. So it is part of the diagnostic process for many of us. And I've always loved, although I haven't always been super successful with it, but I've always loved being super organised about things, but only specific things actually. But when my partner and I moved in together, we just stored all of our CD collection just in the spare room, and because we rarely listened to them, they were kind of like just all kind of jumbled together. And I can't tell you the amount of angst that gave me. And I just hated looking at this pile of CDs, because I just thought, if I wanted to listen to a specific CD, how on earth would I ever find it in there? And I spent about 3 days organising all of these CDs into alphabetical order, even though the chances of me wanting to go and actually find a physical CD are minimal, because I've added them all to my Apple playlist. But it just caused me real issues. And you'll see here all of my clay models are all super organised as well. Just can't bear the thought of things just being out of kilter, really. And interestingly, my assessor could see all of this while I was doing my kind of video assessment with her. And she made comment about that. So I just like things to be super organised, and I really need to be able to find things. And this was a real problem when Ian and I moved in together, because I'm super organised. The flat that I had when I lived on my own was, I could tell you where everything was in that flat. But Ian is he's quite messy by comparison, and it caused me a lot of internal stress, I have to say. But it has meant that I've had to compromise in living with a kind of messier person. But for me, as long as my studio is 100% organised, it really helps me in terms of my own mental health, I have to say. Reason 35 is a special interest in body language. And this is something that has just always fascinated me. And it only now makes sense that my brain was just trying to learn how autistic people deal with life so that I could mimic it in many ways. And I've spent many an hour of my life people watching, whether it be in social situations or if I've just stopped for a coffee somewhere, and I'll just be analysing every person that passes me, and just looking at other people talking and how they present to each other, their gestures, their facial movements. And even as a youngster, I would spend a lot of my time looking in the mirror, making different kind of facial expressions or different gestures, really to see what it looked like and whether I thought I was doing a good job of mimicking other people. And it's just fascinating to look back now as a diagnosed autistic person to see all of these clues, and this certainly was a massive one. It's something that I've just always been interested in. And had I not done a degree in the arts, I think psychology would have come in as a close second, really. In fact, I just remembered that I did actually start an open university degree in my early 30s, actually, but it didn't take me long to decide that arts was really the way that I wanted to go forward. But yeah, it's certainly interested me a lot throughout my life, and I've spent many an hour watching YouTube videos on body language. I just find it fascinating, really. Reason 36 is showing inappropriate emotions within a moment that you should have had a completely different reaction to, really. And yeah, this is something that has cropped up a few times for me, and it causes me real embarrassment. But as an example, I used to work in a charity, and on a couple of occasions, my boss would give me bad news. And the example that I'm thinking of was that she told me that somebody within the sector had died. And I knew that person sort of fairly well, but my first reaction was just to burst out laughing. And it just came out of nowhere. I don't know why on earth I reacted like that, but sometimes when news is just so big and dramatic, I just don't know how to respond to it in the moment. It's the only way that I can describe it, really. Thankfully, my boss was really understanding. She's a trained counsellor, so she's very used to dealing with people showing odd behaviour here and there, really. But I was just kind of a bit mortified, really, that somebody would think that, that's my first reaction, to start laughing that somebody's died. It was yeah, I'm just so thankful that she knew me so well, really. But it's something that has come up here and there, and I don't know why my brain does it. It's almost like my brain's been confronted with such dramatic news within a moment that just doesn't know how to respond, and it's kind of searching for a response, and that is the one that's come to the surface, really. So yeah, it's certainly been really confusing for me as to why that's happened. But yeah, it's happened a few times, I have to say. Reason 37 is the need to have a whole lot of time alone. And I'm sure a lot of you will be able to relate to this one. It's probably a trait that unites all of us, really, or the vast majority of us anyway. I just find people and life and work just exhausting, and I've had to seek solace mainly in bed, actually, throughout my whole life. I've spent so much time in bed, having to just try and kind of zone out and self-regulate and just feel comfortable, to almost have a safety kind of cocoon away from other people. It's just imperative for my whole survival, really. And because of that, I value a really comfortable bed above most things in life, really. I just need to be able to go and feel safe and secure, and to calm all of my kind of sensory needs. It's just so important. And even now, my partner and I really get on, but I still need a lot of time to myself, and just to be able to go off into the bedroom and just to go off into my own world for a bit is just, it's crucial, really. It's so important. And when I think about times in life that I've been really stressed, and it's mainly to do with work, I'd often come home and go straight to bed and just not want to leave it for the entire evening, really. And even for whole weekends, I've just gone to bed on a Friday and just basically camped out within my bed, because it's the only place that I felt kind of safe and secure. And the thought of having to give that up and go into the world and do stuff has just been too much to bear some weekends. There's a lot of traffic noise going on now because it's raining outside, so apologies if you can hear background noise. Reason 38 is restricted diets or sticking to very similar foods, and this is something that's definitely been relevant for me throughout my life, and particularly when I was young actually. I just really struggled to eat kind of normal food and just wanted to kind of eat crisps and pickled onions from my memory. But I think I'll save that particular story for maybe a conversation around traits in girls, but I've always really enjoyed sticking to kind of similar foods. I'm not as restricted as some other autistic people, but I've definitely stuck to a range of foods and very rarely have kind of gone beyond those. And Ian made an observation that was quite interesting, that whenever we used to go out for dinner, and I say we used to because we can't now because I've got mast cell activation syndrome, so I just can't eat out anymore. But whenever we'd go out to dinner, I'd very often order Hunter's chicken, and I'd get the meal and I'd moan that I didn't like it because it would have, I don't know, some flavour within it that I just didn't like. And Ian would say to me, "Why on earth do you always order this meal and you don't even like it?" And I think in hindsight, I would order the chicken because I liked chicken, and that would be the first thoughts in my head. You know, this is a chicken dish, so I'm going to like it. But I would just struggle with the whole concept that it would come with, you know, a sauce and other stuff within it that I just couldn't get on with. And I don't even know if this is making any sense whatsoever, but I think my thought process was so rigid that I, you know, wanted chicken, that I would order the chicken assuming that I'd get on with it each and every time, but very rarely did I enjoy it. It's just, yeah, just an odd thing that I did, and I still don't really understand why, really. I think this became a bit easier eating out when Ian and I became vegetarian for a while, because it just removed the whole choice of chicken from me. Reason 39 is selective mutism. This is actually quite a well-known autistic trait, but not all autistic people will experience selective mutism, but it's something that I've certainly dealt with, but mainly in my younger years as a child. And I spoke about this on my video about driving, I think, but when I was young, I found it really difficult to sit in a car and have to talk to people. I just found it impossible. I think because I'm such a nervous passenger, all that I can do is focus on my environment and what's happening, and I'm so focused on the speed and just everything that's happening around the car that I can't quite hear people that are talking to me, or certainly that's how I experienced it when I was young. I just would not be able to do all of these things at once, really. It was like my brain was being asked to multitask, but I just was not able to do it, and it was a bit awkward, I have to say, but I just found it too difficult. And it's just, when we think about it, it's an anxiety response. It's too much, or your brain's having too much to contend with in any given moment. So it's decided that something has to shut down, and in many cases it's the ability to talk. Reason number 40 is feeling confused with sayings and idioms and metaphors and all of the like, really. And to give you an example, a little while ago Ian got a new parka coat, and he came bursting into my studio after a dog walk and said, "I've just gone flying in my new coat." And I was just like, "What? How? How have you been flying?" And it's just so ridiculous, isn't it? honestly, it took me a good minute or two to even try and understand what he was saying. So basically, he and John Paul had come walking down quite a muddy hill. It was during the winter, and he'd fallen over and got mud all up the back of his new coat. So he was understandably really upset, but it was it was just super confusing. There was like a real kind of disconnect between what he was saying and what I was trying to receive as information, really. And this has happened time and time again throughout my life. It's a very confusing world for autistic people at times, isn't it? And let me know if you've had any similar experiences to those, because I imagine there's plenty of them. Reason 41 is friendships. And I've basically had issues and difficulties with pretty much every friendship in my life, and it's only now I can really understand why, because I've got this new understanding of myself and really trying to see my whole life really through the lens of being autistic is really useful. But I found friendships just really hard, and they've often been pretty short-lived and really intense, and in many ways they've felt like a kind of special interest when they've kind of come around. So I've put all of my kind of efforts into them, and of course when you're doing that there's a real risk of burnout, because as a high masking autistic person, if you're seeing this person for a lot of the time, you're not getting time away to kind of regulate yourself. So it's obviously going to lead to burnout, and it certainly has for me many times over. And I think it's something that we see a lot in autistic people. You know, a lot of us are desperate for friendships and connections, but it's something that many of us struggle with in very many ways. Number 42 is getting easily fixated on things. And what I mean by this is when I've got something that's kind of bothering me mainly, and I'm kind of searching for a way in terms of trying to troubleshoot or trying to process perhaps a problem, I will continually talk about this thing until I'm able to kind of deal with it in many ways. And this drives Ian bonkers at times, and I can certainly see why, because he'll say, Lizzie, you're talking in a loop now. We have discussed this numerous times now, but it feels like I'm not able to process things in a quiet way or let my brain work on things quietly in the background, in that I have to talk about it out loud in order to process it and kind of fully deal with it, really. Reason 43, I think, links pretty well to number 42 actually, and it's catastrophizing. And if there's something to catastrophize about, you can be sure I'll find a way to catastrophize about it. It's just something that I've always done. And I think this is certainly something that's common within autistic people, because we've often led a life of trauma, and it's a way almost of really trying to establish danger within any given situation, really, or to be on alert for danger. So we may well come to the worst case scenario in order to prepare our brain, really, in order to deal with that event if it were to happen. Because of this hypervigilance, it's really exhausting in itself, really, and it's certainly a trait that I really wish I didn't have, because I think any kind of fight or flight response on the body is yeah, it's not good, is it? Reason 44 is over-explaining, and I think this is something that is really common in autistic people. At least I've seen a lots of discussion about this online, and you know, this is something that certainly relates to me. And for me, it's one of the more challenging things about running a YouTube channel, because I'll always wonder about, did I give enough information about this kind of certain thing? Did I give enough context? Did I give sources for whatever claim that I've made during a video? Did I give enough background? It's Yeah, it's really kind of frustrating at times. I'm very aware that I do it, but I'm in little control of it really. You know, my brain is kind of asking me to consider these things all of the time, and it's a very difficult thought process to break really. And interestingly, I'm like this in all forms of communications. Like with email communication, I am terrible for just providing too much information, too much context. I just provide too much, and it's really difficult for me to kind of edit this information really, all these thought processes. And very often when I need to send a response via email to somebody, I'll just ask Ian to check it over with me, that you know, so I haven't provided just too much to overwhelm the other person really. And I think I have got better at this over the years, certainly in terms of email communication, but yeah, it's difficult to know where to draw the line at times, isn't it? And of course, it's really easy to understand why autistic people have this need to over explain things, because we've been misunderstood for so much of our lives that we want to communicate as much as we can so that we're not misunderstood, really. Reason 45 is getting very easily stressed. Now, I know that getting stressed about things is a very human response. Everybody gets stressed, and it's a normal reaction to challenging events. But for me, I don't have the kind of middle ground that other people seem to have really. I go from not stressed at all to really stressed within a matter of moments, and it's almost like I don't get any kind of warning signs, or I don't get any kind of gradients or scales of stressedness, if that's a word. Um, Basically, I just go from 0 to 100 really easily, and it creates just a horrible effect in my body. You know, it creates all of this horrible adrenaline and cortisol, and I'm left kind of dealing with that really. And it feels almost like my body has kind of gone into shock a little bit, really. Like, for instance, if I have to make a customer complaint about something, I'll invariably start off really polite, really accommodating, completely understand the other person's perspective, and if things don't go my way, or if they seem in any way unreasonable, I will lose my temper really easily, and I absolutely hate this about myself. And it's really difficult actually to know how to combat this. The only thing that I've found effective in any way is to really try and avoid situations that I know I'm going to find stressful, or I know that you know there's potential for me to almost lose my temper. So I'll do my absolute best to avoid them. But yeah, I'd be really interested to know if this is something that you also experience and how you combat it. Reason 46 is having difficulties with directions. And I've just always found this really difficult. I just do not know how people are able to get from A to B really easily. And I didn't actually pass my driving test till I was 30. And although I was absolutely delighted to be able to drive a car on my own, I can't tell you the amount of stress that it caused me in terms of trying to find places and not getting completely lost. And I remember about a week after passing my driving test, I decided to go to a local city centre. I was going to do some shopping, and somebody had given me some very kind of loose directions as to how to get there. So I followed these directions and got completely lost, and needless to say, never made it to the city centre. And I had to really try and focus on getting home, and I did get home, but I was completely frantic all the way home, because it was just, I couldn't believe how difficult it was in trying to just get from A to B. I found it unbelievably difficult. And I think pretty much straight away after that event, I was so terrified by the thought of driving. I bought a TomTom, so I'd have something at least to help me with directions, but I still found it really, really hard. And because this software isn't able to tell you which lanes to get into generally, or certainly it never used to be able to, in many ways it just didn't help me, because I needed really clear directions in which lane to get into, which turning to take, and I just felt that it was quite unhelpful. So I just at that point decided only ever to drive locally, and I pretty much only ever did. And I also have real difficulties in giving directions to other people. I just really kind of dread in many ways people stopping me to ask directions, because it takes a lot out of me, if I'm honest. I have to really think about where I am, where it is they want to get to, and then I have to think about the easiest way to explain to them how to get somewhere. And yeah, I find it really difficult. And interestingly, I have to really think about which is left and which is right, in terms of, which is your left hand, which is your right hand. It doesn't come to me instantaneously. I always need a moment to figure out which is which. And similarly, I have issues with, compass directions, north, east, south, west. I have to really think about what they are and what they mean. It's really interesting. And reason 47, I have had little to no interest in a traditional life, by which I mean marriage and children and all the other stuff that comes with the idea of a kind of family life, really. I think I figured out in childhood actually that I had no interest in having children, and my mind has never changed, not even wavered for a second ever since then. I just knew that it just wasn't for me. It just wasn't something that I was interested in at all. And similarly with marriage, we've got this idea about young girls kind of dreaming about their marriage and what their wedding will be like, what their wedding dress will look like. And I just had, just no interest. And I used to be kind of fascinated as to why other girls at school would be just so interested in all of this stuff, really. For me, I was just far more interested in arts. I just desperately wanted to be an artist from a young age, and I had very little, or gave very little consideration to anything around that, really. I should point out that, of course, very many autistic people choose to get married and or have children, but for some of us, not wanting or not being able to have a traditional family life is absolutely part of our experience of being autistic. And I do actually have a video on the reasons why I chose not to have children, and I'll link that down below. Don't get me wrong, I did hope that I'd maybe have a partner one day, but because I thought I was so weird, I just thought, it's probably unlikely, really. I don't really see myself with a long-term partner. And, I've been really lucky. I have met my life partner, and that kind of took me by surprise, if I'm honest, because it wasn't something that I was expecting to happen at all. But the whole thought of kind of getting married, I just have no real interest in it, really. And alongside this, actually, I think this is quite interesting, that I don't have any desire to collect kind of souvenirs or mementos about my life. People take photographs all the time, don't they, to capture memories, and it's just not something that I've done. It's really interesting. I think I've only got about 3 photographs of myself from childhood, because my parents just weren't interested in doing any of this either, really. And even as a kind of teenager and as an adult, I take very few photographs of me and Ian, or anybody else that's kind of friends with us or family members, you know, I'm just not into this kind of whole thing really. And I'd love to know actually if this is something you can connect with as well, whether you're just not interested in keeping kind of photographs or other mementos really, because it's not something I've really heard talked about actually within the autistic community. Reason 48 is having a monotropic brain. So monotropism is essentially a way of thinking where a person is more likely to focus on a very small number of things really, so they're not able to give their sort of time and attention to very many things. Now, being monotropic doesn't mean in any way that somebody is autistic. It's just that autistic people are more likely to have a monotropic brain or a monotropic way of thinking. And when we think about autistic people with special interests, it really does demonstrate how monotropism kind of is put into action really. We divert all of our time and passion into the few areas that really interest us. And monotropism has affected my life in so many ways. And when I think about even the workplace, I've worked in many roles, mainly in office settings where I've had to do all sorts of different things within the remit of the job, and I found it really difficult to move from task to task. And when we think about job adverts that often ask for applicants who are really good at multitasking or working on various things at once, or being able to juggle numerous projects, it's really difficult when you've got a monotropic brain, because I find it so difficult to work on one thing and then suddenly have to jump to another thing and then jump back to the original thing. And I think there's a lot going on with kind of transitions there as well, and difficulties around transitions, but it's always been an area that I've struggled in. And there is actually an online test that you can do to discover how monotropic your brain is, and I'll leave that linked below. But I think it might be nice actually for me and Ian to do this test at some point in a future video, because we strongly suspect that Ian is ADHD, so I think it'd be interesting to see the difference between an autistic person and an ADHD person. So yeah, I suspect we'll do that at some point. Reason 49 is overproductivity. This is something that I really struggle with, and I'm planning to do a video specifically on this at some point soon. But it's something that I really struggle with. I always feel like I should be doing something of value that's useful or is helping me to kind of learn about a thing that might be helpful in the future. I just find it hard to rest and relax really. I've just got this overwhelming need to just kind of do stuff really. Like for instance, whenever we've gone on holiday together, myself and my partner, I've always kind of struggled with just kind of lying there on a sun lounger and doing nothing and just staring at the sky. And although part of me gets this, you know, even in my mind, this sounds like a really lovely, relaxing thing to do, actually putting it into practice, it's really difficult for me just to do nothing. I think through the years this has got a little bit easier, in that as you know, as Ian's got to know me, he's developed strategies to help me with this, and it's almost been without me knowing in many ways. But whenever we plan to go away, in the weeks and maybe even the months before we go away, he'll be asking me about things that I want to do on holiday, including are there any books that I want to read, are there any albums that I want to kind of get into, do I want to take any sketchbooks away with me, and all of this kind of stuff really, which has helped me, I have to say, because at least I feel like I have access to doing things that I find useful while I'm away on holiday. And I do my best to try and relax in as much as I can, but I definitely need to have some kind of special interests really on my holiday with me because I just feel absolutely lost without them. And the final reason for today, bearing in mind that there are other reasons as well, but I have to stop somewhere, is perimenopause. And I felt really compelled to include perimenopause within the essentially 50 reasons why I thought I was autistic, because it has had such an impact on my life. And in many ways, it's the reason why I found out that I was autistic. And I have had just the most horrendous time in perimenopause. And I have actually done a whole video about this, which I'll link below if you want to go and check that out after this one. But it's thought to be the case that autistic people will often have a more challenging time in perimenopause because of all of the sensory stuff that we go through. You know, I really struggled with that and still do. And also routines became so important to me, and they still are. I feel absolutely lost if I can't stick to my routines. And it just got to the point where I thought, why am I having such an awful time with all of this? I can't tell you the amounts of symptoms that I've had because there have been so many and so varied, and they do come and go, but it has been a really challenging time for me. And I was really interested actually to see on Instagram the other week, Autistica, which is a UK research charity which looks specifically into autism. When they started to look at autism and menopause, they were horrified to discover that there wasn't one paper out there. There had been no research conducted on it whatsoever. So this is still an unknown territory, and like so many other areas of autism, there's just such a drastic need for research so that we can understand ourselves and people within our community so much better. I think it's really important for autistic people out there in perimenopause and in menopause to know that there could be very many additional challenges that you're going through, and it needs recognition. A huge well done if you've managed to get through all 50 reasons. You know, I appreciate it's quite the mammoth video today, but I'd really be keen to hear about which reasons or traits that really resonated with you, and similarly, which ones haven't resonated with you at all, really, because I think it really demonstrates how different we all are as autistic people. And yes, we've all got autism in common, but our experiences of being autistic can actually be quite different to one another. So let me know down below. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you ever so much for watching. Give it a like if you got this far, and I'll see you again soon.